Hey everybody, it's Steamboat. Welcome to the latest edition of Trail Talk, videos where I talk about the trail and other such things. What I'm talking about today is what to expect if you're planning on hiking in the 2021 season. All right, before I get into it, I'm just going to let you know what this video is not going to be. All right, I don't want this video to be like political, right? That's not my intention, okay? I'm not here to push like conspiratorial theories. This isn't supposed to be like a threat, okay? I'm not here to like either like guilt people or to like lay blame or shame or anything else about what we're experiencing in the present moment, all right? That's not my intention. I just know for myself, and especially, you know, outdoor users, particularly long trail hikers, can be a real ornery bunch. And I'm just operating from the premise that you've probably already made up your mind about what you want to do. So I'm not here to convince anybody either to do or to not do. But with that in mind also, I'm just going to say that COVID is real. Okay, I'm not a COVID denier. COVID is real, it's infectious, it's deadly, it's something to be taken seriously. All right. So with all that in mind, where I'm coming from is that I'm a long distance hiker. I set out on my first long hike in 2017, and I've just really made it a priority in my life to be able to get out there and enjoy long trails. Okay. I know that not everybody wants to go out there and do a through hike. Not everybody wants to go and spend multiple nights like out under the stars and these sorts of things, and that's totally cool. Kind of when I'm talking about hiking is really what I'm talking about, is hiking, backpacking, mountain biking, angling, anything that you're doing while you're outside. If you're fortunate enough to have like a neighborhood park or something like that, that's even what I'm talking about. Basically what I'm talking about is utilizing public land, all right, public space. And the way that I see it is the reason why I think this is so important, particularly in this moment, is it's no secret that our public lands are under threat. Okay. And so it's just like I said, I don't want to get too political about this, but it's just like we're looking at mismanagement from agencies. We're looking at conflicting interests, people from different players who don't have the same share of power, right? When they're coming to like accessing these resources, talking about time and money and issues of justice and all these sorts of things. But what I really think it has to do with, the social consequences of mismanagement when it comes to the public land. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the PCTA recently released a statement in regards to the long distance permits. Okay. And this is what I kind of saw, and I think this is the root of the problem that I'm going to try to address here. So from the website, and I'll put it right here. So currently, states crossed by the PCT, California, Oregon, and Washington, recommend against non-essential travel, while acknowledging that getting outdoors is one of the safest ways to improve our physical and mental well-being. So I agree with that completely, okay? But what I take issue with is that there's two contradictory premises that are in there, all right? They're saying limit your non-essential travel, but make sure you get outside, all right? And so that's kind of what I'm going to address here. So what I'm going to talk about is maybe some ideas to bring to light that you can kind of think about while you're at home, maybe what you can kind of expect as you're like going toward the trailhead and maybe what that might look like. If you're planning on doing an overnight backpacking trip or a multi-night backpacking trip, I'll sort of talk about what the changes that might look like. And if you're an aspiring through hiker, I'm going to talk specifically about the through hiking experience and what I think it might look like in the 21 season. And that's just drawing from my own experience, right? Through past years, I was out on trail in 2020. And so just drawing from the things that I saw on trail last year, the policy decisions and conversations that are happening currently, and just kind of what I anticipate things kind of looking like as we move into the spring and the summer months. And I'll also just preemptively like apologize if there's any like ambient background noise, particularly like the sounds of kids. There are kids in the house and they're just doing kid things. So I do appreciate you. And before I get started, I do timestamp all my videos. So if you're not feeling exactly what I'm talking about, or if you want to revisit one of these topics, I do try to make it as intuitive as possible. So check that link out in the descriptions. And while you're down there, be sure to leave a comment about, what you're kind of thinking about as approaching the 21 season. Be sure to give this video a like, subscribe so you can stay adrift. I'm not being supported by like a trail organization or any company or anything like that. All right. I'm just trying to put some information out there to try to make the trail experience a little bit better, especially as we're moving into 21. All right, I'm gonna roll my brand page and we're gonna get going. All right, let's do this. All right, so welcome back. So getting into what to expect for hiking in 2021. I think before we talk about what we can expect, I think it's important to talk about what didn't happen in 2020. All right. So again, I'm not here to lay blame. I'm not here to guilt anybody about the conditions as we're experiencing them. I'm just trying to lay out the facts as I see them and just kind of just following these logically about what I can kind of expect. All right. So what didn't happen in 2020? All right. A lot didn't happen. The first thing that comes to mind is that if you're in the long distance hiking community, you always know that there's little acronyms that people kind of refer to as which direction they're traveling. So if you're setting out on the AT, you're going to be northbound. You're a no-go. A new term that was kind of coined in the outdoor world, right, and as a no-go. All right, because people aren't taking trips. All right, people did not take their trips in 20. So what you can kind of expect is that we've had this sort of like waiting period, this grace period, and I would anticipate that a lot of these people who had to postpone or cancel any trips are really looking forward to, they've been like in the planning stages, right? They just like still want those trips to happen, or they're like, planning something that's different, right? Everybody's been kind of cooped up, and, everybody's getting stir crazy. And, if you're fortunate enough, like, to still be healthy, you haven't lost anybody that's really close to you, you're still in your apartment, or, like you haven't lost your job, then I'm just like kind of anticipating that a lot of people are going to be trying to be able to get out there and travel. And so that's, I think, the biggest thing. What also didn't happen in 20, I think, was getting fires under control. Okay, so fire mitigation and the fire dangers I think are going to be an ever-present threat that need to be taken seriously. That could happen unexpectedly, just given the conditions depending on where you are geographically, particularly out here in the West. I've lived primarily in the Mountain West and in the Western region, and so that's kind of what I'm speaking to. I don't have as much experience like back east in the sort of like broadleaf forests and these sorts of things, so I can't speak specifically to that region. So I'm in Colorado currently, and most of my like thinking and my perspective is kind of westward looking, just so you kind of like understand where I'm coming from. So fire mitigation and then people not taking trips. So what does that relate to into the 21 season? And so it's just like with the conflicting information, all right, so make sure you get outside, it's good for you, but don't take any like non-essential travel and these sorts of things. What I would kind of recommend, so to begin, it's just like, what can I do as I'm sort of preparing, how can I prepare myself mentally and just get everything kind of in place, so that I can stay safe, I can keep my community safe, and then I can, preserve public lands, and then I can help maintain those in a responsible manner. So my first recommendation is wherever it is that you are, if you're already like a trail user, an outdoor user, you're probably going to be familiar with the sort of dynamics, what's kind of happening at your local trails. If you haven't spent a lot of time at your trails and these sorts of things, what I've been seeing is that there's a problem with like parks and recreation, like whatever it is in your township or your county or municipality, however it is that they're managing their sort of like public spaces and their open lands. You kind of like investigate maybe like how it is that those programs are being funded. If they're being funded through a sort of sales tax, it's just like because of like the collapse of business and the shift into e-commerce, maybe these municipalities aren't drawing in as much money. They have to shift some money around to be able to like make sure that they're prioritizing the infrastructure projects and things that are like making the town function, and they may not have the same priority for open spaces. So what does that mean? As less money is going into the preservation of these lands, all right, then they're going to become neglected, all right? That's a threat. And so what really needs is, what I'm asking is that it's just like recognize about who is maintaining your trails, who's maintaining your open spaces, recognize that like those services are probably going to diminish, if not like immediately, then they may start to diminish over time. And so what I think this really just kind of means is that I'm just asking that you're going to need to take like a more dedicated and attentive and committed sort of action to really investing yourself like into the preservation of these places. And so what I'm talking about, so it's just like, as we're moving from this, just what can I expect about what's kind of going on in my township, right? As I'm going out to the trail, when you get to the trail, it's like kind of what I've seen. It's just like when I'm talking about those services, so I'm talking about like waste and trash, all right, human waste. It's just like sometimes you go to the trailhead and you'll see like maybe if there's just an auxiliary porta potty or something like that, if there's no plumbing, or a pit toilet. So what I've seen like the U.S. Forest Service, they weren't pumping pits as often, even in more popular trailheads, and so the waste starts to build up in those septic systems, right? And that can create problems. Do keep in mind that the coronavirus can spread through fecal matter, all right? So it's just like maybe something that you like wouldn't necessarily think about. I'm just a dirtbag hiker, and so it's just like thinking of through hikers and things just being in really dirty environments. So just kind of keep that in mind, just like always washing your hands and staying clean, and particularly in the backcountry if there's not these sort of like waste mitigations. And also with trash collection, especially if you're getting out into more remote places, trash collection has historically been like not very good and not very reliable, and it's just like, and we just like intuitively, it's just like there's a can, just put everything in. I've seen like cans that are overflowing and things. I would expect to see more litter and more trash at trailheads because of reduced trash pickup and these sorts of things. So it's just like what that kind of means for anybody that's out there is it's just like you'll see different things that are starting to develop, especially like hashtag these like social campaigns about like really being out there, and not only enjoying it, but then like actually taking a little bit of extra time to be able to make sure that enjoyment experience is just as good for someone else, right? So just like being committed to picking up litter, or making like just small trail improvements, and just like making sure that you're like really leaving things really well, because it's just like as you're going to see more people people coming from these areas who maybe like aren't regular trail users, or maybe who like don't have the same level of experience, or they're like maybe just coming to the outdoors with not that sort of like conservation, preservation mindset. Okay. Because it's just like, for a lot of people, it's just like they want to, you know, be able to step out of their sort of like everyday, the sort of like mundane stream of existence, right? And they like want to go out into the nature and feel connected and feel inspired and see something beautiful. And it's just like everybody has that natural draw, I think. But it's just like it's kind of a behavioral thing. When you go into the outdoors, it's just like it's a different space, and we have a hard time, I think collectively kind of like understanding that. We think of like nature as just like out there somewhere. It's just like some untrampled like ruggedness. We don't understand the level of management that goes into our public lands, the level of infrastructure that is required to maintain so that all these places can stay the way that they are. It's a management issue. And so it's just like, if we think about these, if we're not going in there with a sort of management and conservation mindset, I think then we can actually do more harm. All right. And this relates to the social. And so it's just like there's going to be more social congestion, I think, at the trailheads. And, you know, this is going to relate, I think, to whatever the dynamics are in the region that you're living in. You know, it's just here where I am, I'm in the Denver metro area. So like people with mask compliance is really, really good. Even when I'm just like out at the park, if I'm going out to the foothills, these sorts of things. And it's just like everybody, for the most part, is pretty compliant, is pretty respectful of one another, and is wearing a mask. That may not be the same case with you. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, right? That's not what I'm here to do. I'm just saying that it's just dependent upon your region. You're probably going to act in accordance with whatever the majority is doing. There's going to be a lot of social pressure, particularly around issues with COVID and mask wearing. But I would expect that it's just like, at least at the trailheads, like, you know, wear a mask, and it's just like, and stay masked up, and so that you can stay safe and you can keep your community safe. If you're like maybe like coming from an area, or you're like moving, or you're going to a region that, you know, it's just like that you aren't as familiar with, and like expect some pushback, expect some resistance. All right. You know, I recognize that even where I am in Denver, all right, the dynamics in Denver are way different than the dynamics in a place like Colorado Springs, and that's just an hour south of here. And I have to be honest with myself about that. All right. There's just different dynamics just depending on where people live. And you just kind of need to be adaptable and flexible with that, and just kind of accept the way things are. If there's anything that I've learned over this whole period of time, it's just like there's very little that I can do to convince anybody of anything, right? I think the best thing to do is kind of set an example, because people are going to be looking at that. You know, I think actions speak louder than words, and particularly when it comes to the conservation mindset when preserving public lands as we're going out there and using them is really, really important, particularly in this moment. So that's kind of like what to think about as you're kind of going out to the trail. Maybe some things as you can kind of expect at the trailhead. Just expect more people, you know, maybe a more prevalence of litter and trash, less sort of maintenance and care. So those are just like some kind of things to sort of think about as you're like maybe going out to the trail. So you're at the trail, maybe you're like going out into the woods, maybe if it's just for a day hike, or if you're going out there for a backpack, maybe some things to sort of expect while you're out there, like on the trail tread. I talked a little bit about the maintenance and the upkeep, all right, and how these things are financed. A majority of trail maintainers and the volunteers are like elderly folk, all right? They're older people, and it's just like recognizing that they're in a vulnerable population, particularly at this moment, and just the chaos that was kind of ensuing in the spring and the summer. I know a lot of trail organizations like had to cancel a lot of their maintenance projects, and so, you know, it's just like, despite, I don't know, some misunderstanding, like trails aren't natural, okay? Like they don't just form. It's just not like a social trail that somebody just walks, you know, up and down like a mountain to go to some pretty lake and now suddenly there's a trail. Like maybe that happens occasionally, but that's really not how trails are managed. How trails are managed is it's like basically a construction project. You have to kind of envision this. So the amount of like work that goes into building and maintaining trails is the same amount of work that might go into like a road construction project. There's specialized tools. There's like different building codes depending on who the trail users are. All right. So a trail for like a foot traffic is going to be different than a trail for like equestrian use, is going to be way different than a trail for like mountain bikers. Right. So there's a lot of thought and care that goes into these sorts of things. Nature is always trying to take itself back. Right. So as we like have this 18-inch dirt sidewalk that we like cut through nature, right, every day, like nature is trying to take that back just a little bit. So just with the anticipation, just like knowing that a lot of these trail organizations were not able to do their maintenance projects throughout the year, one thing I might just just caution you, or just be aware of, is that like the trail condition may not be what you expect. Okay, there may be more deadfall, washouts, just like whatever project that they may need to do. Like maybe that they're planning on rerouting a trail or something like that. So the trail conditions themselves, because the people haven't been able to go out there to maintain them, are going to start to degenerate. And I guess it's just like when it comes to, if you're out on the day and then you're just like looking for the backpack, then it's the same sort of thing. It's just like, I know that there's like a lot of people that are wanting to get out there. And so a couple of things for the backpacking is that if you're planning on backpacking, if you're doing a trip in like a national park, okay, just already those permits are insanely competitive. All right, so I'm thinking of places like the Grand Canyon, Yosemite. I don't know what's going on at Rocky Mountain this year, but it's just like in these more popular parks, it's just like the permits for backcountry sites are already really competitive. I would expect them to sort of like cap any sort of like admission into these parks, just to sort of like mitigate the crowds, and so that's just like going to make access to the parks more competitive and backcountry sites more competitive. What happens is, what I see is just like when the parks themselves don't have availability for backcountry sites, is what people will do is they'll start looking for sites just beyond the park. All right, so I'm thinking of like BLM land outside of Joshua Tree. I'm thinking about Forest Service outside of Forest Service land outside of Rocky Mountain, like these sorts of things. All right, so it's just like the rules change when you're not inside of the park, and the dispersed camping becomes more prevalent. And so it's just like what I would expect is a lot of those sort of like campsites along the periphery, particularly if you're trying to access parks, are probably going to be completely inundated. And then moreover, it's just like as people aren't able to like maybe take their first priority is like going to the more like the maintained, like national park experience, and they're going towards national forest and things like that, then it's just like there's less rules, there are less enforcement, it seems like that in a lot of the national forests. And so I'd expect like, more backcountry damage, expanding campsites. You're going to see the sites that are impacted are probably just going to be like destroyed. I would expect to see like more trash. Unfortunately, what I've seen is like when it comes to the waste mitigation is things like Charmin blooms, a lot of toilet paper, because people like don't understand how to properly dispose of like human waste. And so that's one thing that's a real negative consequence that I've seen that's been happening in the backcountry, right? Because of this, like we're not approaching the backcountry with the right mindset, because all we're being told, right, is just like, just get outside, just get outside. There's not a whole lot of education that's kind of going behind that. So that's kind of one thing that I would expect in the backcountry. Maybe polluted water sources. All right, so when it comes to that waste, when it comes to human waste, when it comes to food waste, and then that's going to affect critters too. And so just like a more prevalent critter activity that's going to be, especially at those large impact campsites. It's just like I don't know. It's just like there's a real mentality when it comes to low impact, lightweight backpacking, and I know that a lot of people don't have that mentality, and maybe they might come with like some older school ideas. Making campsite improvements, like changes to the natural landscape, like heaven help us should they start felling trees and these sorts of things. But it's just like this is like, unfortunately, it's not something that's going to happen. It's something that's already happening. All right, and so just be aware that that there's going to be people that are going to be out there just acting a fool. Just naturally, just more people. And so this is going to tie in, all right, so the whole backcountry experience, just kind of like, kind of expecting that it may not be exactly what you want, right? So it's just like, I want to go out into the woods and I want this like pristine experience of nature where I have solitude and things. Well, everybody wants that right now. And there's like very few places where we can go and do that, just because of, the congestion about how land is managed, how we can access these sorts of things and all the rest of that. And so now I'll just go ahead and start getting into like, I guess like the thru hiking experience. So if you're an aspiring thru hiker, like I don't know what to tell you. Best of luck to you. What I've kind of seen out there is like through the experience that I had on the Colorado Trail and the Arizona Trail in 20, and just kind of like what I've seen, these conversations that have been happening like on these like digital hiker like cyber pages, is that like there's kind of like there's a lot of perspectives, but there's like one camp is like stay home, you selfish hiker, and on the other side it's like no, please come because we need your business. All right. So this is really hard, and I'm sympathetic to both causes or both arguments. It's just like on one side I recognize it's just like, yeah, small trail communities that maybe have older populations, not as many like medical resources, it could potentially put the people in those communities in danger. But it was really hard for me when I walked into a place like Lake City, which is in the San Juans, and it seemed like half of Dallas was like in like southwest Colorado. And so it's just like I hear these things about, it's just like stay out of our trail towns, but like some of these trail towns like already attract a majority of tourists. And so that's really hard. It's just like I'm just going to encourage you to like just kind of take that into your mind. just as you're kind of thinking about things. It's like that could be a really difficult balance. And then on the other hand too, it's just like when I was reading about some of the economic impacts that trail towns were taking last year, it's just like I saw that, you know, some of these businesses, like 40, 50, sometimes 60% of their annual revenue comes through hiker season. And a hiker season isn't like, you know, from like, you know, the first day of spring to the end of fall. Like sometimes hiker season is just a few weeks as like a bubble kind of passes through, and they're just like shedding their dollars like as they're walking through. And so it's just like it's a really difficult balance, you know. Like I said, I'm not here to convince you either to do or to not do. You're probably already made up your mind. But I'm just bringing that to light to say that like not everyone's going to be like excited about what you're doing. Okay, like just don't expect that. You know, it's just like I see like when I encounter people on trail or in towns, I'm like, hey, I'm a through hiker, and they're just like, wow, that's really wild and all this. And then it's just like, but you know, it's just like maybe kind of anticipate just having in your back pocket that it's just like there may be people here who don't want you here, or and who are going to share that opinion with you. So just kind of like keep that in mind. Experience any of that, but it's just like things are happening really quickly, and it's really hard to pin down exactly how people are feeling about anything, you know, especially when it's just like just in my little like metro, and who really knows like what the same kind of conversations are happening like across the country. So that can be really difficult. So through hikers, kind of thinking about, you know, maybe you're being in communities that they don't want you. All right. And so just kind of going back also what I just kind of talked about with that that release from the PCTA. All right. So if you're thinking about through hiking, or if you're like planning on doing a multi-night where you're like crossing county lines, or you're going through different municipalities and things like that, like do like please refresh yourself with like what your like the state ordinances are, what those like townships and municipalities, and like what's going on at the county level. All right, because sometimes that these can change just depending on if you're like maybe moving from like a more dense to a less dense area, or vice versa. Especially if you're hiking a corridor like the PCT, majority of that trail is in California, right? It's no secret that California has some pretty strict like quarantine measures that are in place right now, and I would anticipate those kind of getting more stringent as time kind of goes on. And it's just like if you're a PCT hiker, you know, it's just like watching what's kind of going on in LA County, and then kind of in the Bay Area as a sort of bellwether. As I said before, I can't really speak a lot to what's kind of going on in the AT corridor, aside from like looking at like shelter closures. You know, it's just like expecting to like, you know, have more primitive camping, and the natural consequences are going to kind of surround that. Okay. And so just like when it comes to that, so it's just like always make sure that the areas that you're going to be accessed is open. All right. Check in with your local land managers, and just kind of just making sure that those areas that you're trying to use are actually open. And then if you're going to be traveling to a new state and things like that, like I'm just going to ask that you follow the guidelines. Okay. And that like brings me like, you know, so if you're in town, you know, anything like that, just do what the townies are doing. You know, through hikers, I think like are normally going to bunch together into like, you know, tight little social cliques. You know, and then it's just like kind of feeling that it's just like, oh, we've got like our little bubble, so like we don't maybe like need to be as concerned in things. But do remember that you're coming into a place that, you know, that you don't live there, and you know, it's just like you're a visitor, you're passing. Just like make sure that you're keeping yourself safe, keeping your community safe, and you're keeping the trail safe. When it comes to town stops and things, it's just like from what I've seen is that, you know, it's just like a lot of these towns, everybody's taking an economic hit. All right, businesses are closing, you know, people are tightening their budgets, and especially when it comes to hospitality. From what I saw from last year is that there were like more limited beds. And so that can be really difficult if you're going into a town. So this is where the big conflict is going to happen. So I imagine that I'm going into a town. All right, this actually happened to me. So it's just like when I was walking into Breckenridge on the Colorado Trail, I didn't have any fuel left. I didn't know that there was a fuel shortage. But this time, like at the end of July, like, you know, everyone was following the guidance, right? Everybody get outside. So everyone was getting outside. There was a fire ban that was in effect, so that you had to have an on-off switch for like any backpacking stove. And so what had actually happened was there was like a national fuel can shortage that I was completely unaware of. And so it's just like I wasn't able to get fuel, and I had a really hard time finding a bed because everybody was in that town, you know, for the weekends and things like that. And so just like if you're rolling into a town, like don't just expect, as you might normally would, that like, hey, I'm just gonna like go into this hostel and find a bed. All right, make sure that you're like really planning these things. So when it comes to logistics, like do have that forethought. You know, it's just like if you're like me and just kind of likes to do everything just like on the fly, like that's probably not going to be the best approach this season. All right, make sure that you're setting yourself a plan so you do have a place that you'll be able to go, and that you can secure that for you. And then moreover, when it comes to if you're like going to be doing a resupply, you know, prices are going to be inflated. Should that we don't have a breakdown in supply chain, then it's just like, I don't think that I didn't have a hard time finding the things that I needed to, but there was like, an increase in price that I saw. So just maybe budget for like a little bit of extra money when it comes to additional prices and the price hikes that might be associated with the season, right? And that's just going to be a supply issue, So if we're going to see additional people that are going to be out into these smaller areas and just buying up these resources and things, like it's just going to be, that's just natural economics, I think. And then if you're in town and you're trying to get back to the trail, I know that there are some shuttlers, people that were shuttling last season that did not shuttle, all right? There were hostels that were not accepting hikers. There were people that were in the trail community who decided that they were going to sit it out, They may decide to do that again this year. So there could be gaps. There could be gaps in these services, the things that we normally expect of our trail experience, right? We just have to acknowledge that everything is different now. Like that's just a fact. And we just have to be adaptable and just kind of and just work within that space, all right? So maybe the shuttles aren't going to be there. It could be more difficult to get a hitch because if there's people that are more resistant, right? Because hitchhiking is already like frowned upon in the United States, and it's just like you're going to be looking dirty and everything else like that. In addition to everything else that's kind of going on about why somebody may not want to pick you up. So just keep that in mind too. I didn't have a hard time hitching. I did make some friends that that were out there. It's easy to make friends, and so this like kind of brings up the social aspect of through hiking. I think it's just like. The social aspect suffered last year, absolutely. And it's going to be no different this year, I don't think. So looking at the AT, like if the shelters are closed and you're like not, I don't know what their camping is or anything like that, but if it is just dispersed camping, it can be more difficult to find other hikers. There may not be as many people that are out there. The social situation may kind of like diminish when you're having like your hostel parties and these sorts of things. So it's just like people keeping their distance. Like, so just expect to be like more, maybe like more solitude and like more isolation and not so much of like that party vibe. That's just what I'm expecting. We kind of have to see how things develop, but just kind of like going in, just knowing that it's just like the things that you read about online, the things that you see in videos, like the things that you've read in stories and things like that, like everything is different now. Like we have to accept that. Just like you can try to get as much enjoyment out of this experience as you possibly can, but if you're like waiting around for like that, that story that you've read about that you want to have with like 100 people at a shelter or something like that, like you're going to need to abandon those expectations, like unfortunately. It's going to affect the trail experience, and I think that it really does need to expect some of like your decision making. All right, so do expect to be like as self-reliant as you possibly can. So just like kind of approach it like I'm not going to get a hitch. I'm never going to stay inside. When I go to the grocery store, they're not going to have what I want. When I send myself a box, like it's going to be delayed in the mail and it's not going to be in that town when I want. All right. So just really, really plan for everything going wrong. And not only that, and it's like not only is everything going to go wrong, but like probably some ridge runner is going to tell you to get off the trail because, it's like code red or whatever the case might be. And so it's just like really just approaching it with the adaptability, that flexibility, and then just like always expecting kind of the worst. And so when it comes to always expecting the worst, I think this is going to be really important when it comes to backcountry travel. All right, you need to kind of go into that with a real heightened sense of, I think, like risk mitigation. So I heard on a podcast the other day, and I think that this is like a really good idea, but this person was talking about approaching conditions, even in the summer months, as if like we're going into an avalanche environment. All right. So it's just like if you're not familiar with avalanches, sometimes like you'll get a snow and the snow is really good and everything is great and you can go backcountry skiing and all the rest of that. But sometimes you get a snow and it's sitting on top of like an ice layer and then like all that snow starts to come off and you really have to evaluate conditions. All right. You need to be like on top. You need to be like watching the weather, seeing what weather patterns are doing, like looking at highs and lows of temperatures, where things are sitting in the sun. It's just like a lot of different variables like go into when it comes to calculating these types of risks. And I think the same type of thinking needs to go on when it comes to like not only through hiking, but like if I'm going on a backpack, if I'm going to my park. I think it's just like what I really want to encourage everybody is just to like approach this with a heightened sense of risk mitigation. So when it comes to how am I going to keep myself safe, how am I going to keep my community safe, and how am I going to keep the trail safe, right? And so maybe you think that's like kind of like too much, right? So it's just like I'm not going to be approaching this as if I'm going into snow conditions, but I think the same types of things that happen with the unexpected and like really like dangerous and destructive phenomenon of an avalanche is happening at the same sort of like level of intensity as when it comes to like these explosions of wildfires. When I was on the PCT in 17, I was just I was crossing over Chinook Pass, and this was just like right as the area west of Rainier Park was like exploding into an inferno. And I watched those hills like being engulfed in fire, and it was like the most terrifying like moment of my entire life. It's just like watching the smoke come in and the sky turn orange and like ash coming out of the sky, like onto your tent. It's horrifying. All right. And it's just like, no one's going to come and save you. Okay. So it's just like, when we're thinking about, the United States Forest Service and all the resources that they need to direct, right? It's not in trail maintenance. It's not in pumping pit toilets. It's not in taking out trash. It's not out there educating people on how best to best to use backcountry sites. It's none of these sorts of things. Like a majority, I think, like especially right now, of their budget is going to go to fire mitigation. And so it's like, if you're putting yourself in a dangerous situation that's going to require some sort of backcountry rescue, like that's on you. So like, not only is like, don't expect anybody to come to you, but even if they do come to you, so if you kind of think about it, I mean, it's just like, who are they going to prioritize? Is it going to be some 30-something who like fell off a ridgeline and shattered his femur, or they're going to have like more high priority like patients, like when I go to that, like, just out of the way, in the middle of nowhere kind of medical facility. So you like, just be aware of that, that it's just like, when it comes to making these decisions and things, like it literally could be life or death, not just like, I'm going to hit my spot or my in reach and things, and like the helo is going to come and they're going to pull me out of here. Like, don't expect any of that to happen. So this stuff is really serious. Backcountry is dangerous. It's like, if you're going into the backcountry without like the skills, a sort of the right side of mindset, a training, if you're not feeling particularly up to it, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. And now more so than ever, it's just like, just understanding that trouble is yours, right? That's the trouble that you've created for yourself, and you're gonna have to figure out how to get out of that. So it's just like, if you can't like think about how your actions could potentially go like sideways, and you get yourself in a deadly situation, and like you don't know how to get yourself out of that situation, like maybe don't venture so far out. That's just going to be my recommendation until you feel more comfortable. Like I talked about at the very beginning of this, like what didn't happen in 2020, a lot didn't happen. And so it's just like, I've been talking to some friends all over the country and things, and they see like people that are traveling and they're out and like they're on their social pages and they're like doing these things. And there's going to be like, maybe you're going to get some guilt from some folks, you're going to get some shame from some others. Maybe you're going to feel saddened, or like whatever. There's going to be a lot of these things that are kind of come. Like maybe you're going to feel all sorts of ways. And that like that FOMO thing, right, is real. It's just like, as everybody's been kind of sitting around and just like wanting to do something, it's just like everybody's going to be wanting to do something in 21. And so just like, people aren't thinking straight. That's just a fact. They're just like, maybe you just like want to take the trip of a lifetime, because like, who even knows if there's going to be a tomorrow. And it's just like, and then they're just like, maybe like wanting to go big. And it's just like, I see all these things that are happening with everybody else, but like, I have to be honest with myself. Like, is it just because I'm like feeling some sort of like social envy? Am I like really like that pent up that like I need to like go and do these things? Is it like for myself? Am I like going out there like really for that physical and mental well-being? Or am I like trying to posture, right? Am I like trying to like earn some sort of like social credit? Am I like trying to just enact a personality? What's really my motivation from going out there? If it's just like, if my motivation is to go out there and like prove something, or just like, to demonstrate like what type of person I am, like through images online, like don't do it, right? Like that doesn't factor into, I think, risk mitigation. Another piece of advice, if you're like maybe one of these folks who's like maybe a little more cautious about, venturing outside, you don't want to travel anything, it's just like, anytime I get outside, I think it's just really wonderful. Even just being able to like just step out of my front door and just like feel the wind on my face, just that connection to nature can happen in a lot of various different ways. I don't need to walk 1,000 miles to prove like how like in touch with things I am, right? I think it's just really about getting active and feeling that natural connection. And the reason why I want to loop back into this natural connection, all right, because I think that everybody not only appreciates, but I think everybody is deserving of feeling that natural connection. Like I said before, it's no secret that our public lands are under threat. All right, so especially in 2021, we're going to see large social threats just because of increased trail usage, because of the encouragement that we're seeing from our local leaders, right, and trail organizations and these sorts of things. But that doesn't mean it needs to be a negative experience. Okay, I just wanted to bring some of these things out because of the things that I've seen and the way that I anticipate this sort of tracking. Like I said before, we have to just recognize that everything is different now. Okay, and then it's just like we need to take a more proactive and a more dedicated and mindful and committed, I think, mindset of what I'm calling a mindset of preservation and a mindset of conservation when it goes out to these outdoor spaces. It's not some place that I'm stepping out of, right? I'm not stepping out of my life like into the nature. It's not some outside, all right? Actually, I'm going into something. And just as like any space that I step into, right? I step into like a store, I go into like a meeting, you know what I mean? Like just like any sort of like different situation that I find myself in, like there's certain ways that I'm expected to behave, certain like behavioral things that I need to modify in myself so that I can meet that situation, right? And I think the same is true when it comes to the outdoors. And so when it talks about like making these small behavioral things, when it comes to just incorporating a mindset of conservation, then the most important thing that I think that I can recommend is just make sure you familiarize yourself with the principles of leave no trace. You're going to hear this term leave no trace all the time, but that's not it. That's just like that's the name of the idea. There's actually 7 different principles, which are all right here, you know. And so with these 7 principles, it's just kind of like incorporating this like into our thinking, into our mindset. And these aren't rules, all right? They're principles. So you can break rules, you know. It's not about doing good, it's not about doing bad, all right? These are things that need to be done well. Just making a commitment that we can enact these things when we go out into the backcountry, and we can do them well, so that we can just show and we can demonstrate that we are committed, you know. And like I said, whether that's our local park, or if I'm like, you know, going out to the national forest, you know, all these sorts of things require a certain level of attention and dedication on my part, so that I can show that this place matters. It matters to me. It's important to me, and it's worthy of existing, right? And not only is it worthy of existing today, but in perpetuity, right? So for future generations, for these kids that are out here running around, all these sorts of things, right? And that's just where my motivation is for coming with this. So before I sign off, again, my name is Steamboat. That's just my trail name. My friends call me Tobes. That's also not my real name, but we're just going to leave it at that for today. If you want me to talk about any other topics when it comes to trail talk, leave a comment and I'd be happy to take a look at that. I don't mind like doing research and just kind of getting into some of these things and just sharing my opinions. I think it's important. I think that we need to like just open up these conversations about the trail, right? Not about like the gear, all right? It's just like anybody can buy a backpack and like, you know, drive to a trailhead, but actually to go out there and like really, I think, demonstrate an excellence when it comes to an attitude and a mindset of conservation, and really demonstrating a committed activity that's just showing the importance of the natural world is just like really where I'm kind of like coming at, and that's just like the perspective that I'm bringing with these things. So that's what I've got for today. I do appreciate you. Much love to you. Stay adrift. Happy hiking.